Hi, this is Kaery with Kaery Concealed in the Active Self-Protection Extra channel. And today, this is part 2 of the Good Friends Guide to a Great Range Experience.
Lucky Gunner is my recommended trusted provider of freedom seeds for range or defensive use. In stock, good prices, and rocket fast shipping are why I go back again and again. Because of new guidelines, I can't link their site or say it, but you're smart and you can find it with a simple Google search. Stick it to the man by paying them a visit today.
We are talking about sharing enough information with whoever we're responsible for on the range, but not too much information. We don't want to overwhelm anybody. In the last video, part 1, we talked about building a box that to help our learners create a cognitive framework for what they're learning. So if everything is brand new to them and they're unfamiliar with all of the different things we're talking about, it can be very overwhelming and they can't even absorb part of what we're saying. Or if I take my neatly organized boxes of learning and I try to dump all my boxes into their box, that doesn't help them create an organized or structured framework for understanding it. So this box and what's in it hopefully will translate to the application of self-protection by the time we're done. And then we're talking about principles. So principles are universal and applications are personal. And last time we talked about firearm safe handling and safe storage. Today we're going to talk about being organized at the range. How can I organize the range in such a way that or my time at the range before I go, while I'm there in the bench, that sort of thing, to maximize learning. So one of the things that I try to remind myself regularly is that I'm lying to myself if I think that I can stand up in front of my learners and just talk at them and they're going to go away with the information and the practical knowledge and experience they need to be able to handle a firearm safely or whatever topic it is. My goal, we're teaching skills and practical things that they're going to do. So it's a little bit about what they know. They need to know what to do, but they also need the practice to be able to do it. And if I'm just standing in front of them talking, I'm not giving them the practice to do it. I can tell you a horrible example that happened to my husband and 2 oldest sons. This is a number of years ago, and they were very interested in precision rifle shooting. And we knew a gentleman whose daughter was on an Olympic rifle team, and he taught at our local gun club, and he was doing a class. And it was expensive to send all 3 of them to the class. But they went, and it was going to be a 2-day class, but on Friday evening, there was a 3-hour talk that was to kind of explain the principles of precision rifle and what they would be covering over the next couple of days. And my husband and sons were very excited about it. But when they came home, it looked like someone let the air out of their tires. They were very, very disappointed when they came home Friday night. They were tired, number one, but I asked, how was it? And they said, well, it would have been great if we had tens of thousands of dollars to spend on all of the equipment that the individual instructor was saying that they would need in order to be able to shoot precision rifle. Now that was their takeaway, and I'm not saying that's what he was communicating, but that's what they got out of it. And they had a really rough time. They really didn't want to go back the next day, to be quite honest. They did, but it was more of the same. So the class was advertised as something different than it actually was. It was more telling than actually training people to do skills. So I want to be mindful of that personally. That's something I think about often. I talk a lot. I'm an oversharer, apparently. And I have to be really careful that I don't talk too much and overwhelm my students with information. So if you're watching this channel, you probably either visit your range somewhat regularly, or you want to, or you talk to people about shooting, or you have people ask you about shooting. And so these ideas that we're going to share in part 2 are going to be some ideas for keeping things organized so that you can have a safe range experience. So Gabe White says that disorganization is the enemy of safety. And I try to be as organized as possible in a couple of different areas. The first area is in my plan. So before I even go to the range, whether I'm going to go teach a class or I'm going to go shoot myself or I'm going to meet a student there for a one-on-one, I try to plan for what I'm going to be doing. What am I going to be doing at the range that day? What's my goal for going? If I'm going to be teaching, what is the student's goal? Maybe it's reviewing the curriculum if I'm going to be teaching a class. Maybe it's reviewing the email if I'm doing a private lesson with a student that they asked and the things they wanted to cover. Maybe it's going to be thinking through if I'm going to go and just shoot myself, not teaching or anything. Maybe it's going to be just reviewing what drills do I want to cover? Why do I want to go that day? I think it's Masada Ayub who says that every round will teach you a lesson if you let it. And I find that for me, especially when I plan ahead and just at least have an idea of some of the drills that I want to do, that helps me. If I am visiting a range that I've not been to before, that happens sometimes. I like to just get an idea of what it looks like. So I might do a little Google search and see what the layout of it is if it's an outdoor range. Sometimes I just show up too. So anyway, planning is great. Another planning aspect is organizing the bench. So I like to have the bench very organized for my shooters. This is in the context of teaching a class where I am the one bringing the guns, or even if the students are the ones bringing their guns, I actually have yoga mats, but those are actually at the range in a big stack. But I bought a couple of yoga mats and cut them into pieces a little bit bigger than this. And then on the yoga mats, I traced an outline of a gun and then 2 magazines here. And at one time, I had some yoga mats that had actually the box here for a box of ammunition, but I didn't do this last time. I like to put the arrow there also because if it's laying down in the shooting stall and that way is the berm, I like the students to be able to be reminded of what direction they want to keep the firearm pointed in. So notice I have the gun forward on this, not back here, and that helps minimize the likelihood of them putting their hands in front of it. But I encourage them that when they go to set the gun down, or if it's a class that I'm the one providing all the guns, I will set up the station so they're all set up like this all the way down. And that organized appearance definitely helps. I find students really do use those outlined and set them back down, where it used to get kind of messy before, the student before would have set the gun down like this. I do have some ones for left-handers as well. Actually, you just flip it over and it's set up for left-handers, so sometimes I do that also. But if the gun is sitting like this, students, I would see them trying to reach under the gun to get their hand under it to pick it up, rather than just picking it up and turning it over. So that's one area. I like to have the bench nice and organized by using the yoga mats. I also like to teach my students how to turn the gun over without actually picking it up. So if they come up to, pretend this is the shooting stall, and they're a right-handed shooter, and they come up and the gun is facing toward their left hand. Rather than picking it up and doing that, I like to teach them, hey, rather than picking up the gun, you can actually just roll it over. And it's very cute. They'll be like, oh. Or same thing, if a gun falls on the ground, I like to explain to people, you don't have to try to get your hand under it to pick it up. You can roll the gun over and orient it in the right direction without being anywhere near the trigger, and then get it pointed in the direction you need to be able to lift it up and get a grip on that. So I do like to teach my students that I only want them to pick up a gun like they're going to shoot it. I don't like them doing stuff like this and what have you. I want them to actually take the time. I encourage them to lift up the back of the gun, so just raise it off the table just a little so they can get their hand in there, and the thumb crotch goes high, flip off finger makes contact with the bottom of the trigger guard, and their index finger is at home. Another area I like to be organized in is the brief, the safety brief and the medical brief. So like Gabe White says, disorganization is the enemy of safety. And I have a tendency to, if I know my students are waiting for me or the person I'm working with is waiting for me, I tend to rush. And that quote from Gabe White, hearing him say it has helped me a lot to think of, because when I'm rushing, I'm being disorganized often, and I don't want to cause problems for myself. So one of the things as far as being organized is I like to have the safety rules printed out and visible for or the safety guidelines printed out and visible for my learners. You can just write them on the back of a target backer if you want. You don't have to use these, of course, but I like to have those there. when we're covering those, do I have to read those? Do I have to say, remember, always keep firearms pointed in a direction of least consequence? Do I have to say that? Or can I ask some questions? Hey, where do you think I should keep a firearm pointed when I pick it up? Or what is a direction of least consequence? So asking the students questions gets them involved in what you're covering. But I think it's important to have written guidelines for them to look at. We can't expect people to have these memorized. As a matter of fact, I did a survey one day in a gun store. I was teaching a multi-state permit class there and got there a little bit early and was a little bit bored. And so I asked one of the guys behind the gun counter if he would be willing to ask the people coming up to look at guns if they were familiar with the firearms safe handling guidelines or firearm safety rules. And it was just interesting how few people were even able to say one of them. So, and these are people that were going to buy guns. Many of them already owned guns, but we can't expect people to know them when they're brand new to this. We need to give them tools to help them remember them. So I like a visual for those. I also think it's important that we give a safety briefing on the range so that we have a visual representation of what we're going to be doing. That is the berm. That's the direction that we want to keep the firearm pointed. There was a study, I think it was in 1975, and it was the Environment of Original Learning study. You can look this one up. I think it's kind of interesting. And in that study, they found that where you learned the information, the environment in which you learned the information, if you were in that environment again, it made it much easier to recall the information you learned than it was otherwise. And they took a group of divers and they had some divers that were underwater that memorized a list of words, I think it was, and they had other divers that were on land that memorized a list of words. And the ones that memorized a list of words while they were underwater recalled them better if they were underwater. The same is true for chemically altered states. If someone learns something, memorizes something in a chemically altered state, this study showed they will remember it better. They will recall it better in a chemically altered state. So I do think where we learn things is important, and talking about these things while we're actually out on the range, I think helps brand new students. Remember, we're helping them build a box and construct a box for their learning so they have a cognitive framework to put things in. And if the more things that we can give them to look at, not to distract them, but it's like the idea of a tennis ball. If you were to take a tennis ball and somehow hook a piece of paracord to it this long and toss it to someone, they're not nearly as likely to grasp it as if there were 15 pieces of paracord somehow attached to that tennis ball hanging off of it. As you threw it, the paracord would go out like this, and it's a bigger thing for them to catch it by. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to help my learners catch as much as they possibly can. The medical plan right here, actually in the description below, you have, if you'd like it, a PDF of the Active Self-Protection Range Medical Briefing. And this is the briefing that ASP uses. And then it also, on the third page, has the medical plan assignments. And that's what's written out here. So I like to just have a spot for each person's name, primary and secondary. Why do we have a primary and secondary? Well, what if the primary 911 caller is the one that needs medical attention? And this isn't just for a, shooting type wound. I've been at ranges where people have had massive heart attacks. Anyway, that was awful because when it was in a small town and so many people that were at the range called 911 that it actually shut down the switchboard or whatever you call it, they couldn't get calls in. And then because it was a medical call at a shooting range, EMS thought that it was a shooting. And so they weren't able to come into the building. And anyway, it was an awful situation. So we definitely want to make sure that we say that there's been a training accident at whatever the location is. I usually write the address in here. The scene is safe, and please send the woo-woos or the rah-rahs, as one of my kids used to say. Instead of ambulance or police car, they'd hear the siren. And anyway, but that's important that we say there's been a training accident and that the scene is clear, and not say that, that someone shot, because they might, EMS, it just might not be the response we want, because police have to clear the scene. If it's a shooting, police have to clear the scene before EMS can come in usually. So anyway, this is in the description for you if you'd like the Ask Medical brief. One other thing I forgot about, let me go back up again to keeping the stations organized. One other thing I thought about, or forgot to share with you then, is I found in the class, I teach a couple of classes where I provide the firearms and students can come and shoot 10 to 15 different semi-automatic handguns and see which one they prefer and kind of try them out. We have a matrix that they can evaluate each gun by and find out which one's going to work well for them. One of the things I noticed in that class early on is people would, pick up the gun and they'd be looking at it, trying to figure out what it was and tried to read on it what it said. And so I made these little cards. MSRP on these is going to be off because these are many years old now, but I made up these little cards that have a picture of the gun itself and then what the name of it is, its capacity, and then I had a lot of people wanting to compare the width of the gun and the length, that sort of thing, and then if it had a manual safety lever or not, and then how many magazines it came with, that sort of thing. So anyway, I put that information on the card, and then I just put that card in the lane with the mat. So the mat's there, the gun's on it, the magazines are on it, the ammunition is off to the side, and then I have this laying right here. It's important not to put it up here, I found, because people will reach up there to grab it. So anyway, so I have those for each firearm that I might have in the lane, and that's really cut down on the amount of unsafe manipulation of the firearms. And remember, these are people that are brand new, they're just learning. I also do encourage people to try to find out how much can you find out about the gun without even picking it up. So while the firearm is laying in the lane, what can they learn about it without picking it up? Is the action open or closed? Does it have an optic on it or not? What are the iron sights like? Where's the magazine release? And I encourage them to just roll it over like that to look, and then they're not even having to pick it up. And they're able to learn a lot about it with just looking at it and not touching it. All right, so we talked about the medical plan, and we talked about having doing a safety brief within visual view of the range itself. I think it's great to have visible medical gear as well, and for those of you that are responsible for running a range, or if you're just taking friends to a range, or you're the instructor, I think if we're the ones responsible or in charge, I think it's really important that we do have, at the very minimum, some stop the bleed training, but TCCC if possible. But not only that, but also having visible medical equipment on. That's something that Mr. John, Miss Steph, and Mr. Neal are, it's important to them. And we all do have visible medical gear on when we're teaching. So I think a little bit of preparation ahead of time, and a little bit of organization, just a little bit of structure, can definitely help remove pounds from the weight bar that my students are trying to lift. That weight bar is very heavy when they first start because all of it's new to them. And if I can remove a few pounds through having a very organized shooting bench and having tags that have the name of the gun on it and some information about the gun, anything I can do to remove a little bit of weight from the lift that they're trying to do at the time, the more it helps them be independent on down the road. So I just don't want it to be too overwhelming for them. So what are some of your must-haves, if you'd leave in the comments for us, what are some of your must-haves to take to the range when you're in charge or you're running a range or running a line? And then I also would love to, if you'd be willing to share this, how are some ways that you stay organized when you're going to the range? And that's all we have today. We look forward to seeing you next week.